gentlemen, we're going to call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order. I'd like to remind you of a few things. Please turn off your cell phones. If you have to take a call, take it outside. And let's be respectful of people who come up to speak. If you're part of the public coming up to speak, you need to come to the microphone. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. If you're from the community council, you'll have 5 minutes. And let's, no booing, cheering. Let's just try to be polite with each other. Okay. First thing, can I get a motion for approval of the minutes for the March 13th meeting?
I move that we approve the minutes for the March 13th meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay. Brenda?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Andreas?
Yay.
Amy?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Weston. He's, okay, Weston.
It's okay.
I'll abstain. I was not here.
Okay, Matt?
Yes.
And Adrian?
Yes.
And Sarah?
Yes.
Okay. Passes unanimously. The chairman has nothing to report. Vice chair?
I have nothing.
And director?
Nothing to report tonight, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, mitigation of residential housing loss ordinance revisions. Lonnie, come on up.
Given all the noise in the hall, I think we're all going to have to talk a little bit louder into the mics tonight.
Yeah, and make sure you're really close.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chair. I will endeavor to be clear in my speaking. My name is Lonnie Egertson-Goff. I'm very pleased to be here before the Commission to discuss and remind you that we are looking not for an action from the Commission this evening. We're looking to do a briefing, and I assume you'll be doing the public hearing after I do a brief presentation. And then we plan to bring this back to the Commission at some point in the future. So I anticipate that you have all read and digested the ordinance changes that are proposed. We will be anticipating some changes since the public open house that was in February. We've received several comments and had a meeting with a couple of folks that were very interested and had some concerns, and we're trying to address those as we go forward. We have had conversation with our attorney that's helping us through the ordinance changes, and I just wanted to let you know that kind of up front. So, yeah, if I could drive this better. Yes. So housing and neighborhood development, our mission is development and enhancement of livable, healthy, and sustainable neighborhoods. My division is responsible for the growing SLC housing plan, and we have, as part of that plan, been working with planning staff to identify barriers to affordable housing and housing in general. As we all know, we have a challenge with a variety of housing products and types for inclusivity and equity throughout the city. And our mission includes a variety of housing types and people throughout the city. So let me just dive into the really fun stuff. So our objectives are to look at the language in the existing ordinance, and we are really focused on the process to change any residential use into a non-residential use to make sure that we mitigate those potential losses of residential units. This has been a challenging ordinance over the past 20 years, since it was initially adopted, I guess under the Corradini administration, there have been different interpretations of the formula used for the actual dollar amount that would be paid to the Housing Trust Fund over the course of 2 different revisions to this ordinance. We have worked with Housing Advisory, I'm going to get the other part, the HAB Board, to try and address and at least understand why those formulas have been such a challenge. They are the board that reviews any housing mitigation plans, which are required by the ordinance. And I think we've only been able to capture just under $10,000 in the past 3 years. That information is in more detail in your packets. If you want to get into more detail about that, we can. So we're working on the process. That's the focus for the revisions. We want to remove the term affordable because we want to include all types of residential use, all housing. A building permit would be the mechanism in order to trigger the need for looking at if there's a loss of housing units, and that would require a housing mitigation plan to be worked on with the building services group, and then as appropriate, talking with planning and housing and neighborhood development staff. Oh, I keep trying to use the mouse, just a second. If a housing mitigation plan would be required, that would be submitted to the Building Services Division. It's a little bit tricky because the Building Services Division is separate from HAND and separate from planning just administratively, but our civil enforcement manager is the one that works with the housing advisor. I'm sorry, I've lost the acronym meaning, but it's HAB board. So he manages anything that comes before the board, including potential housing mitigation plans. So the details of the exemptions, we've expanded that. It seems counterintuitive, like almost a double negative. I think one of our public pointed that out, but we've expanded it to be an exemption would be if there is not a loss, a net loss of residential units. Also, if it's not a permitted or conditional use in the zone, then we would refer to the land use and that exemption would be allowed. And then lastly, if we replace other uses through an adaptive reuse process. So those are kind of the high level changes that we are proposing. We did talk extensively with the HAB board, several HAB board members, and with building services staff, Orion Goff as the director of building services, and several of his managers to kind of just work through what would make sense for process within the city to capture the needs for a mitigation plan. And we also worked extensively with Joel Patterson in planning, and have talked quite a bit with Wayne and Michaela just to understand how we would all work together. So that's really the bulk of what I have to present. If you have questions right now, I'd be happy to answer, or if you want to do the public hearing.
Okay, questions for the applicant right now? Anyone?
Just the definition of a residential unit, is it bedroom, what's the definition of residential unit?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I'm going to ask Wayne if he can help me.
It would typically be a housing unit. So not a bedroom, but an actual dwelling unit, housing unit.
So that could be a
So if you,
single
like, have a
family,
three-bedroom
multifamily.
house and were to tear it down and put up a mixed use with a workspace on the bottom and a studio on the top, that would not trigger a net loss of residential
I
dwelling.
It would
don't,
be,
right.
go ahead.
No, sorry. Yeah, under the way that's looked at now, I don't believe that would be the case. I mean, we'd be replacing one dwelling
Or
unit
one.
with one dwelling unit.
Right, even though the people living there would be fewer.
Right.
But if you demolished a duplex and put in a single-family house,
That'd
then
be
as
a
part
loss
of
of a
the,
dwelling unit.
and then you have to go,
Through the mitigation plan.
and that's either you pay a fee or you build another unit?
Correct.
I'll let
Correct. That's
get in
the
on that.
intention of the ordinance revisions.
Like an accessory dwelling unit qualify?
You know, because accessory dwelling unit was not in effect when we started these ordinance revisions, I don't know that we pose that question. What do you
Yeah,
think?
that's actually a good question. I mean, I think these are things that we're going to have to put on the list as something to take a look at through this process.
Wayne, are there multiple zones that are exempt? I mean, we came across one of those not too long ago for housing mitigation. What's the coverage of those zones that are, this doesn't come up or doesn't apply?
Well, are we talking existing code right now or the new proposed changes? The new
Well, I
proposed
don't know that the
changes.
proposed changes have anything to do with our zoning ordinances, but there was one on, I can't remember, right by the aquatic center, the Sorensen Aquatic Center.
Oh,
And that particular zone was exempt from any housing mitigation loss.
Yeah, I believe those are like light manufacturing zones.
And so I would want to know, what's the coverage of those type of zones? Are there massive amounts of potential housing that we could lose that would either be triggered by this new ordinance or this rewrite, or would still not be a problem or an issue?
No, I think with this rewrite, it kind of changes the whole process. I mean, the way the process was set up, has been set up in the past, has been a little problematic because it ties it to land use application. Whereas actually now this is changing it to the building permit stage. So if you're coming in just for a building permit and you're removing a housing unit, then this mitigation kicks in. So it gets us outside of the whole, zoning district coverage kind of scenario, and it's really just we're just looking at housing units.
So if you're doing your due diligence on on a property that you've purchased and it has an old house on it and you're building a 7-Eleven, when would this come up? It's not in the zoning ordinance, it's not,
if you were going to build a 7-Eleven,
Yeah.
then you would have to get a building permit.
right, but then you find out,
Oh, I hear your question. I
then you
apologize.
find out that, and you're ready to build, so you go get a building permit, right? And then you find out that, oops, something's going on here. And I have to, put $10,000 down or
So
whatever.
I can't speak for Wayne's staff, but I anticipate that working together with Housing and Neighborhood Development and Planning and Building Services, we would work to educate folks as they go through processes, educate everyone. I know that's a humongous dream.
Because otherwise you would see it in zoning, or you would see it in,
Some trigger where.
in the
you-
building code, or you would see it in you would have to go to the housing code
Sure.
to find this, and why would you do that if you're building a 7-Eleven?
I need to actually back up on my statement a little bit here too, because as I'm going through this, ordinance, there are some things where there are some exceptions.
Right.
And so, it isn't, like I stated before, where it's just a like-for-like scenario. There are some exceptions. So if the housing is a non-conforming use, which would be kind of in our manufacturing zones, where basically dwelling units are not allowed, so that'd be non-conforming use. That's an exception to this code. If the property is located where the master plan calls for something other than residential, or calls for exclusive non-residential, then this would not be in effect.
Mixed use?
It would be in effect for mixed use because housing is allowed in mixed use. That was one of the difficulties that we had in trying to implement this a little bit was the existing ordinance required to go through housing mitigation. I believe if somebody was trying to rezone a particular property from maybe strict residential to mixed use, the way that the code read, that would require housing mitigation, but oftentimes or sometimes they don't actually have a proposed use yet, and they may be coming in with residential at some future date. But the way that the ordinance worked, it kicked in the housing mitigation when we really didn't even know what we were doing yet. Whereas I think what they're trying to do is get it outside of that scenario and make it more tied to the actual building permit. So I have a game plan. I'm coming in. I know exactly what I'm going to do. Now we're going to look at the housing mitigation.
So you say that there were 5 units demolished and not replaced with housing. That makes me think, how big of a problem is this? How many possible
Well,
parcels across the city could
For
convert?
clarification, it's been not well, we haven't received the benefit of a mitigation plan or dollars back into the Housing Trust Fund because the ordinance is not effective in its existing state. Is that answering your question?
Why is it not effective, Lonnie?
So what I'm hearing is maybe it's not getting triggered at the right point to allow what you have set up to work.
Yes.
So then it just never comes up.
And the formula is written in a way that it has resulted in a net negative.
Okay.
So it's just confusing. What was that, Paul?
I was going to say it's poorly drafted as it exists. We've run into this where we've been asked regularly, how do we capture what the ordinance is trying to do here? We've been saying for a long time we need to fix it. So that's what we're trying to do.
So what I'm hearing though is this is a bigger problem than what you have metrics currently showing. You
Yes.
think it is?
Thank you.
Is there a reason why you've elected to eliminate the term affordable as opposed to define it?
Well, we're hoping that this isn't a competition between affordable and non-affordable units. We want to improve the possibility of housing throughout the city. So that's been the conversation, like I said, with planning and with building services and with the administration higher up than me saying we want, housing for everyone. And if we limit this to just affordable housing units, then we limit the potential mitigation.
So, Lonnie, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Did that answer your question, Adrian?
Yes, it did. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that does answer my question. Thank you.
So, Lonnie, so I'm taking it that by removing affordable, you're allowing also a monetary capture for a larger portion, well, pretty much everything, for the mitigation trust. But I'm wondering, since this ordinance doesn't deal with the mitigation plan, what is that an internal policy of what you're looking for? What goes into the mitigation plan? Because I'm wondering if that can kind of address affordable for affordable. If we're losing an affordable, can we be getting it back? And maybe it's not written into this ordinance, but it's part of your policy of how you review the mitigation plan.
So
But that's not
I
in front
don't
of
know
us.
for sure, but I would be happy to bring back some further conversation about that because I have not actually been part of a mitigation plan process from when someone comes in to
And I don't know how much of that is even the planning commission
level
topical purview, but it might be important
process.
as you
Yeah.
are redoing this ordinance that you also look at how you review mitigation plans and what you expect in them. And it might be a good opportunity to address this question that's coming up of like, why are you removing affordable, that you can then have a mechanism where you're trying, to work towards a gain of affordable units instead of a loss.
Yes.
Okay.
So, in the first part of this revised ordinance, it crosses out the demolition permit. So if somebody comes in and just wants to demolish 3 houses on their lot, this isn't triggered. Because they have to be going for a building permit. Or is there a distinction between a building permit and a demolition permit?
Yes, there is a distinction. And so I think maybe we need to be a little bit more clear with our attorney about what our intention is.
If I just demolish the houses, do I then have to do a mitigation plan, is I guess the point.
And that was the intention, so I will
Okay.
work to make sure that
That's
that's
in-
captured.
Paragraph A.
I'm sorry, I don't have the ordinance memorized.
It's, really?
But I will, are there other pieces, Brenda? And we can work on this. I mean, there isn't like a, we have to do this tomorrow. We want to get it right. So if there are things that you want us to look at specifically, I'd be happy to take that through staff. And
What are some examples for the new exemption, the last one, is replaced by other uses through an adaptive reuse process?
so I'm thinking like an old medical office. I'm trying to think of other examples. Wayne, help me out.
But what is in this? Is it the housing is replaced by other, like, I don't understand, I can't even
Right.
Yeah, the
make sense of the language.
double negative exemption part. I'm having a tough time coming up with an example. I apologize.
So, I'm sorry.
No, I would just suggest then, provide some examples of what that means. Because I don't know that it's particularly clear.
Yeah, there's going to be a coordinated effort with this. This is, and putting this in here is probably a bit of the cart before the horse, because you guys are going to be seeing, hopefully within the next, 5 months or so, 4 months or so, an ordinance on adaptive reuse that's going to set up what's allowed, guidelines, things like that on reusing buildings. And it'll outline, just maybe as an example, building in a, particular area that's at least, 50 years old, would be eligible for adaptive reuse, meaning that you could get exemptions from certain zoning criteria to keep that building intact as opposed to demolishing the building, so we could keep some of our.
So if I have a large
Own
house and
resources.
it's a unit and I convert it to
Law offices.
I'm retaining the structure, but the use is changing. You're saying in that circumstance, it would not trigger a housing mitigation
Well, it would
requirement?
have to fall under, it depends on what the adaptive reuse process comes out with. I mean, that's kind of that's a pretty hypothetical situation.
Conceptually, that's what this exemption is trying to capture, that kind of.
Potentially, if that type of adaptive reuse is allowed. However, I think we're talking a bit more, and this needs some better definition, obviously. And this will come out through our adaptive use ordinance. But this will be more along the lines of, you have an old warehouse building that was used for warehousing, and now we want to convert it into something else. I'm not sure how this adaptive reuse thing is going to be in here, so that's something that Han is going to have to really evaluate. I'm not sure what was necessarily meant.
And I think it was Allison, our attorneys, and our attempt to update the existing exemptions in the ordinance. So we'll definitely look at that particular.
And I have one last question, then I'll stop.
Oh, you're
But
fine.
if you're, let's say I operate a nonprofit that does arts programming for at-risk youth, and I take a house in a neighborhood and convert it from a dwelling unit to my program
Workshop.
space,
Mhm.
what accommodations are there for organizations that are doing things that are good for the public good to have to participate in this mitigation plan for housing?
I think we need to come up with a more clear, to Amy's point, way that we're going to structure a mitigation plan and have some allowance for, nonprofit or other social service, because I know that's a high priority for the mayor to manifest that in the mitigation plan.
That would be good. And all right, I lied. I have one last comment.
Okay.
But I do think there should be some cross-referencing within the zoning code that this does exist and this can apply if you're in a particular zone and you're going to demolish a residential unit, just so people are on notice and it doesn't arise the first time at the building permit issuance.
So my understanding is that we try and minimize our cross-referencing between ordinances. Paul? Or do we just do a whole bunch of that?
Sorry, I was talking to Wayne. What was the question?
Oh. Adrian, do you want me to rephrase or do you want to say it?
So I think there should be some cross-referencing in the zoning ordinance to this ordinance so that people, if they're in, looking at a property, it's in a residential district and they need to demolish the residential units, that they know this ordinance will kick in so they don't get through the entire development process and get to the point of a building permit and then finding out about the mitigation requirement.
I'm always a fan of cross-references so that people are not caught unaware. And that's something that I can mention to Allison about the Planning Commission concern as she's working on this.
I apologize, I was a little sarcastic earlier.
It was well-deserved. Thank you. I'll stop now.
Keep making notes, kids.
I've got a lot.
So Lonnie, I have a couple of questions on valuation. And I'm going to start with why would you leave the valuation determination up to the developer and not have some secondary city source to agree with that valuation? Because we've seen nationally how we devalue property and then we get away with not paying the proper things. If we're talking about trying to properly fund the trust, what was the rationale behind leaving that valuation determination solely up to the developer?
Well, so that I don't think it was entirely intention. The appraised value or the development process, the value has to be ascertained at some point. And our intention was to say, this is going to be the appraised value of these units that are being lost based on, say, the Salt Lake County Appraiser's Office. And then the new units, or the lack thereof, would have a percentage. And we started with 5%, and that became too problematic. At least it was based on building services conversation. So we said, let's start and see if we can get some amount of money from the new formula, and then if we need to, we can
that kind of dovetails into the second part of my evaluation. One is, I don't think you should be leaving it up to the developer to give you a valuation, because obviously they have a different self-interest than the city. The second, I think 0.004 is 0.04 is ridiculous. It's way too low. And we're still going to just be devaluing our housing, and we're not going to have a trust that's properly funded. And I think anything below 1% is, it shouldn't even be on the table.
Maybe I'm thinking of it incorrectly. I was thinking 4%.
0.04 is 4%.
Yes. Not
Oh,
0.04.
okay.
0.004, yes.
And so we all know that I am not a mathematician.
Neither am I.
So when I looked at that up and I did the calculations, it comes out ridiculously low.
We want it to not be ridiculously low.
It's ridiculously low. I did
Well-
the calculations on I don't know, I think I did like 800,000 and then I times it by that and it was like $30,000.
So
You know-
yes, we'll look at that some more.
I think there needs to be some sort of projection of what you're expecting to capture, and is this valuation, this percentage, appropriate for what you're trying, what you want to be capturing? I think it's too low,
Okay.
and I think we've seen the effects of. I even feel like if you were capturing all of the funds that you technically could be, it would still be vastly underfunded. And so this is an opportunity to work it backwards from what you're trying to attain, what your goal for this is, and then are you assigning a proper valuation to it in terms of what we're losing to what we're gaining, and so that the developer doesn't tell you how much it's worth, And then they know up front, like, this is what I'm going to have to pay if I'm going to take down housing and not replace it. Those were some of the things that really stuck out to me of, like, why would you go about that? And I just would recommend you look at it again and see what you come up with.
So I have one more concern about the way this is going forward, and it is, that there is an exception for properties which are dilapidated or something like that, and otherwise need to be taken down. I would not make that exception. I would say something like if it's a unit that's been lived in within the last 2 years, because you could just allow things to go down, and we don't want that. That's exactly the opposite of what we want.
But I would say that there are lots of places that are lived in that probably shouldn't be lived in right now that are not safe for. So yeah, working on that more clearly, defining what that dilapidated or
If it's
or
been
existing-
lived in, then it needs to be replaced. I mean, that's the
or
end story.
rehabilitated,
Or
right?
re- replaced, rehabilitated, whatever, but what you can't just sort of write it off and say, okay, well, that was a rotting apartment, so we don't need to replace it.
Okay, anybody else have anything right this minute? Okay, Lanny, you can step back.
Thank you.
We'll open the public hearing. We'll take comments from the public. So, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this topic? And I do have Cindy's card, and we'll let Cindy go first because she gave me the card first.
So I just want to be sure I can speak again when we get another version of this proposal.
I believe that the purpose of this is to collect comments.
Okay.
And so I think you're good for the next meeting.
When you dealt with the housing policy, I said to you that there was a lack of a safety net under the existing affordable units. That is a nail I am going to keep hammering until the city does something about protecting the existing affordable housing, which exists without subsidy. The history of this ordinance, it's a sad tale, but it's characteristic of the Cordini administration. It was never designed to generate a lot of money for the Housing Trust Fund. It was all about creating additional tax base, which was what the Cordini administration was all about. You can't understand how the math operates until you understand that what Cordini wanted to do was increase the tax base. If the tax base was higher, then there was no money going into the fund. That's the math that Lauren Parisi presented to you on Wasatch Community Gardens not very long ago. The policy here changes completely if you take out the words affordable and you change whether you're talking about residential or non-residential development. It changes everything in terms of the policy. The math has been problematic since I started down this path on the 21st of February. Housing thinks that you come up with a big number. The numbers that have been generated have been negative. I don't know why we can't get on the same page about the math, but we can't. The references in the ordinance to the number being prohibitively high are not consistent with what the staff is generating. The 0.04 is just absurd. This is what I do. All day, every day, and usually on the weekends, I rehab dilapidated housing. They're historic buildings. They're very nice, most of them now, and the ones that aren't nice yet aren't rented. So to suggest that this is what it costs to provide affordable housing and that all it's worth to the city is 0.04, it's just insulting. It cost me $100,000 a unit if the building is already up. And I don't see turning this over to civil enforcement. I did send you some comments early today. I'm sorry they were late. But I hope if you didn't have time to read them, you will read them. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir, come on up. Step up to the mic, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
I have a handout. I sent correspondence to the staff, and apparently you guys didn't get copies of this. And I want you to have copies.
Is there one for everyone? Thank you. And we need your name, sir.
Oh, you need my card. There you go.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Funk. I work on housing and have for many years at Crossroads Urban Center. I haven't done much planning and zoning because, 20 years ago, Crossroads was instrumental, along with many other interests, housing advocates, and there were more of us than there are now because a lot of the federal dollars that were being spent on that are gone. What you have is a lousy ordinance that we're trying to make better. What you don't have is real sense in the ordinance. We've read the ordinance, we've met with your staff. Your staff told us that they had not checked with other jurisdictions across the country that have mitigation ordinances that have worked fairly successfully over time. Over the last 20 years since the Corradini administration, you have had nothing but false steps on this. This could be another false step if indeed you go ahead with the ordinance as it is written. Your staff has been agreeable to us, they've met with us, but they told us that they had not checked with any other places. You can get on the internet and look under mitigation ordinances, and by George, you'd be surprised at how many jurisdictions have ordinances. Every state has a different law that overrules much of what's in the ordinances in others in our state, but you can still do a better job than we're doing. Why is that important? Affordability. I come from an organization that works on affordability for people in housing. If you don't have affordability in here, it's lost in the discussion. We cannot be with you with every demolition or application. You have to do it. The city has to do it. The city hasn't been doing it, so let's do it right. This is just, the more we talk about it, the more I get perplexed. And I tell you, I haven't done this before, but I was at Crossroads when we actually had the conversation about how to do it. It wasn't accepted. Let me give you one example, and I'll
That's your 2 minutes. Can
no,
you,
but you need
can
to
you
hear.
bring it to a point?
You need to hear this point. We have behind us at Crossroads, we're on 4th South and 4th East. We have behind us, I'm forgetting the name of the apartment building, a 197-unit apartment building. To build that unit, those 97 units, none of which are affordable, we had 4 units of low-income housing torn down. There was not one penny returned to the state or to the Housing Trust Fund because those were lost. Because of all of the ambiguity and the silliness that's in our present ordinance, we got nothing affordable for the trade of 4 units, affordable units, very affordable units, for 197 that are not affordable to anyone except if you can pay $1,400 a month for rent. My George. We
Thank
need
you.
to do a better job. We'll meet with them, but we'll be back to see you again, too. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this topic? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to recommend that we leave this public hearing open. Do we need to make a motion for that?
No, because it's your prerogative to keep it open, but you also
Okay,
would make the motion to close it. So you just,
okay.
as the chair, you
I
can do
think that in light of the kind of conversation that's going on and the ongoing process that's going on, we'll leave this open, and when you come back to us, there'll be another opportunity for the public to express their concerns. So we'll
But
just-
we do need a motion to continue the matter.
So moved.
Okay.
I move we continue this conversation.
And I second it.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Let's start with Clark.
Aye.
Matt,
Yes.
Adrian,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Andres,
Aye.
Carolyn,
Agree.
and Brenda.
Yes.
Thank you. You're continued. Okay, now we'll take up the next item on the agenda is the conditional use for a utility pole-mounted antenna array. Take it away, Lauren.
Okay. All right. So Caleb Cox, representing T-Mobile, is requesting this conditional use approval to install a new antenna array with a diameter of 39 inches on a utility pole located in the public right-of-way at 922 South Emery Street, seen here. A special exception is also being requested at this time to allow existing utility boxes associated with the antenna array to remain on the southwest corner of the private property. Salt Lake City's zoning code allows antenna arrays to be mounted on utility poles that are in the public right-of-way in any zoning district by right or through the building permit process if the diameter of the array is 30 inches or less. If the diameter is greater than 30 inches, the array must obtain conditional use approval before a building permit can be issued. There is an existing antenna array located on the subject utility pole that would be replaced by the proposed array, seen here. The city issued a building permit for a 30-inch array to be constructed in 2015. However, the array was built much larger than what was approved, and therefore this antenna is illegally existing. As you can see, on this overhead view, the existing array has a diameter of 80 inches or 6 feet 8 inches, so that's that outer circle. And then the proposed array would have a diameter of 39 inches or 3 feet 3 inches. As you can see on these elevations, the existing array also has 6 antennas, and the proposed array will be reduced to 3 antennas. And then here's another view of the existing antenna array taken north of the site, kind of just up the street, just to get a different perspective. Again, a special exception is also being requested for the size of the existing utility boxes on the site that are seen here. Salt Lake City's zoning code also allows utility boxes associated with antenna equipment or antennas on private property that do not exceed 4 feet in width, 3 feet in depth, and 4 feet in height, but anything larger must receive special exception approval. So during the review of this conditional use request for the antenna array, it was discovered that this equipment too was constructed larger than what the initial building permit approved. So 3 of the 5 existing boxes that are starred here exceed the dimensions allowed by right without special exception approval. So therefore, though the equipment will not change, the applicant is requesting a special exception so that the equipment can remain. While this equipment is not very visible from Emery Street, it is very visible from the 9-line trail that abuts the property just to the south. So as a condition of approval, a solid wood fence must be installed around this equipment so that it's completely hidden from the 9-line trail. And then the applicant just sent me this photo simulation of what that wooden fence would look like around the equipment. And this is taken from the trail, kind of looking northeast. So with this petition, quite a few concerns have been raised by the community. A large part of this concern doesn't necessarily involve the conditional use at hand, but the amount of time it took to open up an enforcement case to investigate the size of the existing array. While the planning division can't speak directly to the enforcement process, it seems there was multiple misunderstandings across different city departments in terms of the size of the antenna that was approved and the size of the antenna that was actually constructed. Ultimately, an enforcement case was opened and is open now, and that was opened in June of 2018, which is why the applicant applied for this conditional use approval to reduce the size of the array. But because the amount of time it has taken, staff is also suggesting the condition that the existing array be taken down within 90 days of this approval, no matter if a new building permit is issued or not for this proposed array. The existing array still needs to be taken down within 90 days. The community also expressed concern regarding potential environmental and health effects of radiation from the antennas, but federal regulations make it clear that a local government cannot regulate wireless facilities on the basis of environmental effects of radio frequency emissions. Finally, many concerns were heard regarding the negative visual impact of the array. The array will be very visible from the ground on Emory Street, and the conditional use standards do consider compatibility of uses and structures. In this case, it cannot be determined that a 39-inch array has more of a negative visual impact than a 30-inch array, which would be allowed without conditional use approval. But given this concern, staff is suggesting the antennas be painted to match the pole or in such a manner that best reduce their visual impact. And then finally, I also wanted to mention that the applicant did attend the Poplar Grove Community Council meeting in February, and many of these same type of concerns were brought up. At the meeting, a motion was made that the group would not support the proposal unless the diameter of the array was reduced to 30 inches or less. Support for this motion was unanimous at the meeting. So the applicant did try and go back and reduce the size of the array from the 39 inches even further. However, he indicated that it wasn't feasible because of current technology, and so therefore, the Poplar Grove Community Council does not support this proposal. So in general, planning staff does feel that the proposal generally meets both the conditional use and special exception standards. The conditional use ordinance also specifically states that conditional uses are allowed uses unless appropriate conditions cannot be applied to mitigate any detrimental impacts that may arise by introducing the new use. So planning staff does not feel that the 39-inch array creates a detrimental impact opposed to a 30-inch array, and therefore is recommending approval of the conditional use and special exception.
With those conditions.
With those conditions, yes.
Any questions for Lauren right now?
What's the height of the array?
The height of the pole is 60 feet.
And the array sits
Right
the
on
top,
Yeah, it's to the top of the pole.
56 feet up.
Yeah, yes. Oh, yeah, they have that labeled on the elevation.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll have you step back as the applicant here.
Yes, let me just pull out.
Okay, come up, state your name for the record, and you'll have 10 minutes.
Okay. My name is Caleb Cox. I'm representing T-Mobile in this matter. I appreciate the time to talk to you guys. We're seeking approval for the conditional use permit as well as the special exception, as Lauren has stated. Just to kind of give you a very concise rundown from T-Mobile's side of this, the site was never supposed to be built as large as it was. Unfortunately, a mistake was made. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. It was brought up with a code enforcement letter that was sent to us, and within just a couple of weeks, we started acting to rectify this. Initially, it was supposed to be 30 inches with 3 antennas, flush mounted, as you saw on the picture. We went through several configurations to try to get to that 30 inches. Unfortunately, the closest we could get is 39 inches, which I would contend a layperson looking up from 60 feet down probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference of 9 inches. But the code is there, and that's why we're here for a conditional use. I also wanted to state that the actual location and the usage of this site is pretty important to the west side of Salt Lake. It serves over 4,600 people. You can kind of see the area there. It's right in the middle of this very densely populated residential area. It's hard to put cell towers in residential areas, as I'm sure you know, so that's why we utilize the utility poles. So essentially, I am here to rectify this as the best we can. We have gone through all the community concerns and the city concerns and are presenting the best solution we can to serve these people while also getting it as close as we can to what is permitted, and also screen it and make the visual impact as low as we can. This is kind of what it would look like without the pole there. Just, I mean, kind of give you a little idea. It doesn't, I mean, you can kind of see it, the difference. It's a pretty large area. So that's kind of the background, kind of the nuts and bolts of this situation. I'm here for any questions you might have.
Are you guys agreeable to the conditions that staff has put on the report?
Yeah, we are.
Paint the
Yeah, we're
antennas?
agreeable. The 90 days, we'll do our very best. You know, we'll stick to that if that's the condition that's put forth. We are, when this was built and in the past, this is kind of we kind of were able to piggyback off Pacific Corp's franchise agreement with the cities. We are now getting our own. And that's in process, so that will have to go through the city council. I think that might be the only item that might, but we're well on our way with it, and we're happy to abide by all those conditions.
Okay. Any other questions for the
I have a question.
applicant? Sure.
I'm just curious, is Salt Lake have more stringent regulation on the size of their towers that you guys can't get one down to 30 feet? Is that what's going on?
30 inches.
30 inches, I apologize.
That's a tough question. There are there's a lot of cities that have pretty strict guidelines. Salt Lake City is actually pretty good when it comes to utility poles. I think there's just a new ordinance that just passed that makes it a little bit easier even to go on utility poles, I think it'll reduce the amount of actual monopoles and rooftops we'll have to do. So the 30 inches is a tough measurement to meet, in that I think probably when that ordinance was written, the size of the antennas were quite a bit smaller. And now with the faster technologies and the more capacity, I mean, all these people watching Netflix on their phones, the technology it makes them a little bit bigger as it gets. I mean, even now, some of the new ones coming out that would never fly on one of these poles. I mean, they're as big as a door. We've reduced this as much as we can to kind of, we're balancing the need that the people have in this community, and also the visual impact that we're trying to reduce as much as we can.
So there's a correlation then between the size and the capacity or the efficiency that you can run your network on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a correlation between size and technology.
So is there a way to make it bigger but nicer looking, like put a tree around it or something? Or
we do that.
Those ones in Vegas, or
we do that, and that came up in the community meeting that I attended. In this case, because it's a utility pole, we wouldn't be able to do that. It's not our property; it's Pacific Corp's property, and also, there's live power lines on it. It just slim. In these cases, the way we kind of reduce it as much as we can is slim mount them. We don't let them raise above the top of the pole, and then we paint them, and eventually it just kind of blends in, hopefully to the surroundings. But
How long has the existing pole been there?
I believe it's been about 2 years. I think we got started on it the very beginning of 2016.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier there were some errors made by T-Mobile. What were these particular errors that you?
It's hard to say, and a lot of changes have been happening at T-Mobile since this happened. Believe it or not, the people that were involved in this are no longer at the company, and we're building several sites all at once, all the time. And as far as we can tell, they grabbed kind of the wrong equipment and went to town. It was kind of a era of building fast. You know, these carriers are kind of always at kind of an arms race with each other. Right now it's the 5G. This was probably the 4G. And I think as far as we can tell, the wrong materials were picked up by the crew and put up, and it's hard to catch that, and that's why it got brought to our attention when code enforcement picked it up.
So right now the diameter of the current is 30 inches, right? Right now?
No, right now it's 6 foot 10 inches.
Okay. Thanks.
So it's going to be smaller.
It'll be quite a bit smaller.
Anyone else?
So the neighborhood's going to have reduced capacity, though, as well, right? For
Yeah.
handling their needs?
Unfortunately, they will, but as far as T-Mobile goes and internal conversations, you know, we don't want the neighborhood to suffer. So we're going to probably look at maybe another utility pole in the area where we can maybe kind of pick up that slack. Yeah, but we are going from 6 to 3 antennas. So.
Okay. There's no other questions from the commission right now. We'll ask you to step back.
Oh, did Carolyn have one?
Right. So how is this helping the neighborhood?
I mean, what do you mean specifically?
Less.
I mean, it'll help the neighborhood in that it was built incorrectly. We're going to correct it, rectify it, and maybe in the future, if we want to go bigger here, we'll go through the proper avenues and channels to do so. But I think the issue now is it was built incorrectly. It's out of compliance. We're trying to bring it to compliance, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay.
Okay.
We'll let
thank
you step back. We'll open the public hearing. Okay, we'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone from the community council here who would like to speak? Seeing no one. Okay, is there anybody from the public who would like to come up and speak? Come up to the microphone, state your name, and you'll have 2 minutes. I'll take your card. Oh, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Harmon, and I'm with the Poplar Grove Neighborhood Alliance. So we have been tracking this issue since 2015, when this illegal cell tower was put into place. And I appreciate Lauren's kind of description of it. She's much nicer than I am. But she calls it misunderstanding. I call it ineptness. We brought this a number of times to different processes within the city, and we were failed at every step of the way, including the planning director, not Wayne. He's not the planning director, I get that. But I mean, we went through enforcement. They told us it's in compliance. We're like, we can tell them between 30 inches and 80 inches. Again, 30 inches, less than 3 feet, 80 inches, more than 6 feet, okay? We actually purchased a device to measure the thing. And I think that the processes that were in place, that should be in place, were not in place, and that we were, again, failed by that. So it is kind of this bait and switch. Oh, we have this huge antenna. Great, we're going down to 39 inches. Okay, we want 30-inch antenna. And the concern about the boxes, that again, it is against the 9-line, which is, we've invested huge amounts of money. The 9-line is one of the least attractive trails in the city, which we're hoping to fix. But the concern about a wooden fence or against that is then it opens up to graffiti and things. So if they do put a wooden fence, we'd like some beautification, some landscaping in front of the wooden fence to make it not accessible to people, to add more degradations to the neighborhood. But again, the original plan was 30 inches that they applied for. I have a hard time believing it was just, we picked up the wrong equipment, right? But I do think that it's important that they go back to the 30 inches and that the existing utility pole, which is actually a new utility pole that was put in to meet their needs, wasn't there in the past, so you had to have been there, it wasn't there, they had to put it in and then put this big, huge monstrosity in there. So Carolyn, what the advantage of the neighborhood is, brings us back to what it should be, which is the 30 inches within the community. And we would ask that you not approve that and that they go back to the original 30 inches. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this item? Again, come up, state your name for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
My name is Michael Clara, and on the staff report, on page 66, there's a document that's called, from the Poplar Grove Neighborhood Alliance that was written back in January, and a number of those issues haven't been addressed. And what's concerning to a number of people in the community is just the dishonesty that T-Mobile has approached this issue, and then the complicity that we saw with the planning department and zoning department to allow this to happen for 2 years, to be illegal and violate city ordinances. There's no consequences to this whatsoever. He can just come in here and sit here and say, oh, we just made a mistake and we picked up the wrong equipment. 30 inches from 6 feet to 11 inches is just a mistake that we picked up the wrong equipment. What else are they doing wrong? And then there's no countervailing power to give them any kind of incentive to do anything right. They can come in a community, do something wrong, and then everybody just says, oh, it's okay. Just come back and get a conditional use permit. One of the issues that the Community Alliance plans to pursue is found on page 75. Is that has not been addressed at all, and that's on page 75 of the report, quotes one of our documents about the wetland preserve that's a few blocks away and the Jordan River. The planning director has told us that by federal guidelines they can put this tower in with no consequences. We disagree. The Director of Environmental Policy and Compliance with the United States Department of Interior has recently pointed out that cell towers need to go through an environmental assessment process when they're next to wetlands or next to a migratory bird path, which the Jordan River is one of those designations where we have a migratory bird path there. And so we would ask also that the Planning Commission require that they adhere to the federal guidelines and ask for an environmental assessment be done on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. I'll invite Lauren and the team, Caleb, to come back up, and there's probably a few more questions.
Okay.
Just some clarifying questions for staff. So in this case, I mean, what's happened with the 80-inch diameter antenna is not really before this body, right? I mean, we're
Right.
considering what's going to happen, not what is there, and it's up to code enforcement and others to deal with the antenna that's out of compliance, correct?
Yeah, so, and a HAZE or a housing and zoning enforcement case is open, but the applicant has applied for this conditional use to try and close that case out, and what we're looking at tonight is the conditional use and the size of
So
the
the
array.
enforcement of that is not something that we really have authority
No.
or...
And I will say the city does recognize that mistakes were made along the way, but that's not what we're reviewing here.
Okay, and then with the conditional use, we only have the ability to, I mean, us as a body, it's really about, we have to identify a detrimental impact.
Exactly.
And then make the argument that impact cannot be mitigated to deny it.
Yes, because conditional uses are allowed uses as long as detrimental impacts can be mitigated.
Right. So, and this whole thing about going from 30 to 39, can they go bigger than 39 through a conditional use process?
Yes,
Or,
they can, and there's projects where arrays have asked for quite a bit more in diameter, so they can request what they'd like, and then we assess that from there.
and could they have come forward with the 80-inch diameter array and requested conditional use for that?
Yes, they could have, yeah.
So the fact that it's okay. And then just to clarify again, I mean, this question about the wetlands and the federal guidelines, in that instance, I mean, that's still not, is it really purview of this body to review if it's in compliance with the federal standards or not?
I don't believe so. Yeah, I think that's the job of the FCC to look at, and federal regulations kind of prohibit us from.
The federal government would need to enforce.
I believe so,
that
based
and
on
not-
that.
And not city?
Yeah, I referenced that in the staff report, and I believe that that's the federal regulation that would guide someone to the FCC to look into that.
So hearing the community's concerns, and they're clearly some of the frustrations they've had. The only thing that we really have teeth to is that we have to say that there's a detrimental impact that it cannot be health and safety standards. So it has to be, we have to identify some other impact.
Yes, based on the way this federal language is, I would say so, yeah.
So it can't be health and safety standards, so it's only related to some other detrimental impact. Visual is one that you identify in the report. I did not hear any others identified in the public hearing for detrimental impacts from the smaller.
I think those were the main things: environmental and the visual, and then just kind of the existing antenna array. So.
And then last good question. So on the fence, when it goes up, and this question of graffiti, what's the city's graffiti removal policy would apply to that fence, and the city would be taking care. I mean, how does that filter in private? That sort of thing.
I'm not quite sure. We talked about. We talked with the applicant here that there could be potential for graffiti, and that's why they selected wood, so it could be painted easily if that does happen. The problem with landscaping, although that would be nice to have there, is that's the city property on the other side, and it might be hard to maintain just in that location. But in terms of, I'm not super familiar actually with our graffiti policy, and I don't know how it applies on private property.
So I can actually answer that for you, Matt.
Oh, okay.
It's totally, the city will remove graffiti on private property.
All I remember is they took down a Banksy in a matter of like 3 hours.
They're very efficient.
Is the one.
You just
that's how I remember how fast.
you just put in you can get on the mobile app and put in a graffiti request, and they will come out, and they're very quick and take care of that on that fence. So if it occurs,
We're open to any fencing that the city would prefer. I mean, we recognize that the goal is to screen it. We submitted photo sims of slats, but because they were easily replaced, and but we thought that maybe total screening would be better, so vinyl or wood, whatever might be easier to maintain.
I mean, I think vinyl is harder, but wood is great if they want chain link. Do the slats for some screening, because chain link doesn't screen it. But as far as graffiti goes, that is something that the city will take care of fairly quickly. I think they have a really quick turnaround on any of those requests, so it would fall under that purview.
When we're considering the detrimental impact for the conditional use, are we considering the detrimental impact of the 9 extra inches, or of the whole project once it is beyond the 30 inches?
I think in this case, the 9 extra inches, if I'm not mistaken, because a 30-inch array would be allowed without a conditional use.
So we'd be arguing that the 9 extra inches would have a greater detrimental impact than with the 30 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't know if you might know the answer to this, but in your assessment, are there other similar utility poles or arrays like this anywhere else, like bigger than 80 inches that you know of?
Well, a recent one that I just happened to know about is on 1226 South, 1100 East, and that, just for reference, is 73 feet tall and 10 feet 2 inches in diameter. And it is kind of a mixed zone in terms of there's residential and commercial in the area, but that I just happened to know of that because it was recently went through our process.
Is that up?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
the commercial there is literally like Kyoto and
Yeah.
Liberty for the Heights Fresh, because that's where I live. I've never noticed it. I had no idea it was there until I read it in your report.
Yeah.
And I travel there every day because I live there.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know that it was there. So I don't know
Maybe
in
you'll-
terms of talking about detrimental impact.
And Amy, I noticed it, but it's because I used to do what he does.
So yeah, I didn't even know it was there, and that's where I live. So
I do think that it's at that height, to see that extra 9 inches is going to be a unique person that's going to notice that. Any other discussion? Someone like to make a motion?
I am just going to say maybe that is why my T-Mobile coverage works better in my house.
There
I'm
you
just
go.
connecting those dots. I'm appreciating this now.
I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you, Adrian.
Based on the information in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use request PLN PCM 2018-00585 for the utility pole mounted antenna array and special exception request PLN PCM 2019-00168 for associated utility boxes at 922 South Emory Street with the conditions listed in the staff report.
And a second?
I'll second that.
Brenda? Any more discussion? No? Okay, let's start with Brenda.
Yes.
Carolyn?
No.
Andreas?
Because I think in some ways in this case, our hands are tied, especially with federal regulations. I think we have really no choice on some of the detrimental effects that we see, so I'll have to vote yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Weston?
I just want to say that I feel for the neighbors who feel like they were not given a fair shake from the get-go. I think that's troubling, and I get their concerns, but in our discussion, I think it's clear that our hands are tied as to what we can do, and that hopefully the city will follow up with those issues and help make it right for the community. But I will vote yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Adrian?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
And Clark?
Yes, but I do hope that we actually see more antennas of a proper size to keep capacity in that area so that it's necessary. So.
All right, thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you.
And we are done for this evening. I adjourn the meeting.